Hey guys, welcome this week. You're joined with me and Tom. Hopefully, Jen's going to be joining us like mid podcast. She's actually traveling right now, so I know she's in a car. And so her plan was to kind of join through her phone. We'll see if she actually makes it or not. If not, you're stuck with a lovely me and Tom, and we'll see if Jen
Handsome.
joins us or not. So we actually have a ton of updates this week, guys, but they're somewhat localized and going through. We've kind of mentioned over the last couple of weeks, there's a big messaging conference that was going on. Well, that actually happened. So you're going to see a ton, an absolute ton of updates related to Outlook and some of the stuff going on in Exchange and stuff like that. So we'll hit on some of those. We'll kind of group them together, some of that. But there are some pretty cool stuff coming out in SharePoint and OneDrive and admin features in general. So we'll kind of get into it, kind of let you guys know what's going on and what we see that we think is cool this week. Tom, you want to go ahead and get us started?
Sure. There are a couple of items in the in development area. And in development means they're back there in the labs working away, trying to build this, and eventually it will be released to us, but it hasn't been yet. The two that jumped out in the SharePoint realm or in the Office 365 OneDrive area type thing. One is file hover card conversations. They've been doing a lot of work with this recently, where if you hover over a file, it'll give you inside look, some of the snips that it thinks are important, what the activity's been. But now what they'll be doing is they'll also show relevant email meetings and team conversations that relate to that. So if somebody sends you an email, a Teams message, meeting invitation that references a file from OneDrive or SharePoint, that conversation is going to be part of the hover card. And I think that's really cool in the sense that it's, again, giving you more context of what's going on without you having to go look and find. Half the time you may not even find it because you don't even know it exists. This is going to kind of consolidate it all for you.
No, definitely cool.
Go ahead.
No, I was just say I think it's a really cool feature. I think it's something that when I went through and first read this, I didn't necessarily think, oh, this was like a thing I would have thought I needed a ton. But once you kind of get an idea of understanding of how it works, I definitely think this is going to be like a quality of life, ease of use type update that they're bringing.
Yeah. And the other thing which is so cool, and they've alluded to this, I think at the SharePoint conference, and all of us were like, oh my God, please give it to us soon. And that is the SharePoint site URL rename. And so what this means is that in the SharePoint Admin Center, you'll be able to change the URLs of one of your sites where, when people go, oh, I need to change the name of the site. Okay, fine, go ahead. Well, it didn't change the URL, and it won't. Well, now you can do that. And the thing that is really cool, and I'm really hoping this works out well, is that they say the changes are opaque. What that basically means is that if you still have links to the old site, it will automatically redirect you. So part of the thing that we've run into is that people are going, well, what about all my people who have favorites, or what about references and documentation or stuff like that? Before it's like, well, it'll be broken. You'll have to fix it as you find them. Well, now it's just going to say, oh, poof, take you to the new spot, and that's done. I'm like, wow, that is really awesome. Now, the questions that those beg are, how long does that redirection work? How transparent is it? If you change a site twice with URLs, does the first URL you had redirect to the second, which then redirects to the third? There's some edge cases that might be interesting to see if they actually accommodate. But overall, the approach they're taking here, I think, is huge in terms of being able to adapt your business and satisfy your user base for having both names and URLs that match what the site is actually doing, regardless of how many reorgs or stuff like that you might have. So awesome thing. Looking forward to that. And we will definitely keep you in the loop as to when that hits rolling out and fully launched.
Sure, and you guys can probably see Jen's trying to get in. She's joined a couple of times from her phone, but I don't think it's been actually working. So hopefully we get her in here soon. If not, Tom and I will just kind of keep trucking on. So we did kind of mention there's a ton of stuff going out after the messaging conference. I'm not going to go through all of them, but if you guys are interested, there's a ton of stuff for iOS and Android that's going through and doing stuff like better meeting handling, so you can from your phone do more stuff with meetings that you typically have to do through Outlook or through Outlook for the web. Increase support for certain things like and stuff with iPads. So if you have an iPad that has a little bit more functionality than maybe your watch would or your phone would have, they're starting to bring some additional stuff out there for Outlook for iOS that are going to specifically support some of the stuff for iPad. Things like opening multiple messages on the same page. Well, it's probably not really viable on your phone, but if you have an iPad that's a little bit bigger, you probably have the ability to do that. So again, cool to see them going through and upgrading some of that stuff. Now, there's a couple things from the nerdy dorky messaging side that I thought was really cool that I'm going to go through when we're talking about rolling out. So I'll try not to be too dry about it, but there's a couple things I thought were neat. There's also one thing I was telling Tom before we got on here. So I work with a lot of customers in the GCC High. One of them was having an issue like a week ago, 2 weeks ago, and I was going back and forth with them, and I identified pretty quickly what the issue was, but we wanted kind of confirmation. It was basically they had renamed their company name, which changes your OneDrive sync folder. Once we realized that, they said, oh, crap, and changed it back. And it took like 4 days for it to change back, even though it went through on the first time. So I was like, no, I think that's what's going on. So we wanted to put in a ticket with Microsoft and be like, hey, like, what's the deal? Why is this taking so long? So I, thought I was being helpful. I typed up basically a little ticket response form. I was like, here, go throw this into the ticket and you can take it in. They're like, what do you mean throw it into the ticket? I was like, well, just like go to the contact help, put this in there, and you should be fine. And they're like, oh, well, we don't have a contact help button. So it turns out if you're in GCC High or the DoD governments, literally the only way right now that you can contact support is by calling a phone number and physically talking to someone. I'm sure that's related to some of the compliance reasons where you have to be working with U.S. citizens and stuff like that. But right now, if you want help in those tenants, you have to call. They actually added on to the roadmap that they're going to add the ability of the need help button where you can go through and you can actually contact support and you can go in and actually do a ticket type thing, which I'm sure my customer will think is really, really cool. So I wanted to do a throw out to that one because that was literally something that just happened to me that I thought was cool to see. From there was a couple cool things. One of the things that I liked the most, they have a new item called automated incident response for compromised user accounts. I actually see this as huge from the security side. Going into what it is, if you actually dig into the description, they are basically put together a playbook for recommended actions if you think an account might be compromised. They'll basically run through a ton of useful information for you. So if you were a security guy, this is probably something hopefully in your enterprise that you went through and developed on your own or put together some sort of process. Well, now you don't have to worry about this. This is Microsoft coming through and saying, this is best practices, this is what you should be doing. Or if you're a smaller company, this is basically handing you a playbook that you can follow. So doing stuff like how the user was compromised, if the user clicked on a bad link, if the user performed malicious activity such as sending phishing email or malware. Once they did click on that bad link, what happened? If they set up delegates for other users for mail forwarding, did they go through and try to access other accounts? All that type of information is going to be posted there. They started dabbling in some of this stuff with some of the really robust Azure AD Premium licensing about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. It's cool to see them going through and bundling some of this and putting it together and making it more accessible. Because again, this is some of the next level security stuff that you don't have access to information and content like this if you're on-prem or if you're in some other system. So I think this is really one of the security differentiators for Microsoft. And as a security dude, seeing this gets me excited. I think this is one of the things that's going to be an awesome tool in your tool belt.
Nice.
There's another thing too, Tom and I were talking about. Tom, you want to kind of mention and talk us through the OneDrive and SharePoint localization about emails and notifications?
Sure, I will if I can find that again.
Sure, so I'll start prompting as you get comfortable for it. So basically,
go ahead.
Basically, they announced that for organizations that are worldwide, for organizations that have people that are throughout different systems, well, right now, if you go through and do an update and OneDrive needs to send out a notice, it's basing on where your tenant is set. So if I'm a company that has a tenant in the U.S., but I have users that are in Japan and users that are in Germany and users that are in China, wherever it be, they all get the email in English because my tenant is set to the US. What they're actually going through and doing is they're going to look at where your user's location setting is as far as being defined in Active Directory, and based on that, they're going to change the language of the message to be targeted at the users. I thought it was a really, really cool thing.
Yeah, exactly what he said. Basically the description is we will now localize emails where possible to the preferred language of recipients as defined in their Active Directory and Exchange settings. In the case of multi-recipient emails, they've built logic to consume content and cite languages to localize emails. So like Adam said, it's nice now that you're not assuming or having to assume that if I'm the English speaker who's sending stuff to China and India, that it has to be consumed in English, which may not be their primary language. Now there's going to be some level of translation. And Microsoft's translation stuff, short of voice recognition translation, has gotten really, really good. So I think that's going to be a huge thing that if you are in that situation, if you have that use case, definitely turn it on when it comes out and see if that ends up helping you with some of the communications that you have globally.
Yeah, definitely thought that was pretty cool. Realistically, the only other thing I think probably makes sense to kind of go through, you had kind of mentioned, Tom, one of the things you thought was cool. I don't know if you've talked about this, but the external sharing reports in OneDrive.
Yeah, that one is actually in development, and it's kind of linked to the fact that the partner change for that one, the external sharing reports in SharePoint, is actually in rolling out. So what you can basically do is go out and see all the items in a site that are shared externally in the external sharing report for SharePoint that's rolling out. And in OneDrive, end users will be able to do reports on all of their shared content to see what items they're sharing. So that will be really nice if you start to have governance calls that you say, okay, every month or so, you should probably go out and do this and see what kind of things you have in OneDrive that you're sharing, or maybe you shared in the past and you're not remembering that. I think probably the bigger thing would be, hey, I shared this folder with people and I've been putting stuff in the folder, but I don't specifically remember that I shared it with them. You may want to run this every once in a while just to keep track of that, because I know that Delve has freaked a lot of people out going, oh God, how can people see this stuff? Well, because you shared it. Well, now you can actually go out and see what you've shared and be a little bit more proactive in that area, which is good.
Yeah, so I'm going to mention one final thing and in development, but Tom did a wonderful job of kind of transitioning us to rolling out. The final thing I'll mention, just because I thought it was cool, again, harping back to my GCC High customers, I don't know if you guys use usage analytics in the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, but we love them. As a partner specifically, this is one of the best ways that we can show, hey, you went through and started working with us, and look at how many more people have started using stuff. So we're really a big fan of it. We try to encourage our users to do it. But same thing for you guys if you're out there in IT. One of the best things you can do that gives you hard numbers is how much are your users using the services. If you want to justify rolling out something, or you want to track, hey, we're going to go and try Teams, you want to see how many people are using that. Well, Microsoft has this package of content that will show you email activity, Office activation, SharePoint activity, groups, email app usage, a whole bunch of stuff like that. They're now bringing that out to GCC High, which is cool to see. So going back to is kind of what Tom was saying, we already mentioned the SharePoint external usage reports, which kind of pair with the OneDrive one from in development. But now we're moving into rolling out, which is where the SharePoint reports live. Rolling out means right now they should be basically coming live. You should be seeing them start to come into tenants, definitely the people that were in first release. And this is the expectation, is that they'll be coming out and be fully available to people soon. So you hear us talk about something here like the external sharing reports in SharePoint. It should be something you're expecting to get your hands on, or maybe even already have your hands on right now.
Mm-hmm.
So anything else you want to go through, Tom, outside of the external sharing reports for SharePoint?
Now. Yeah, the couple other things. One is the differential sync for all file types in OneDrive for Business.
This was cool.
Oh yeah, this actually almost got people out of their seats for a standing ovation at the SharePoint conference. What they had done is they had taken a 1 gig image that they had done in Paint, which we all thought was really funny. He called it up, and it took a while to open because, hey, it's 1 gig. He put a text box on there that just said words or something like that. He saved it, and literally it saved in like 3 seconds. And we're all like, oh my God, he just saved a gig image in 3 seconds, because all it did was save the differential between the image before and the image after. And they're
Which is
now
real
applying,
cool.
oh yeah, they're applying that to everything. So they used to be able to do it with like Word and Excel and stuff like that. Now they're doing it across the board for all file types. And that
Which
is
is,
just like mind blowing.
for some of the clients that I've worked with that have those files that they're storing in there, and there's actually be a good transition to one of the next points too. AutoCAD files, which are now going to be available, is something that you can sync in Share or in OneDrive, which
Because they're huge.
yeah, which are absolutely huge. This can save so much time. I've worked with companies that their average file on some of their OneDrives is like 4 gigs. And so if they'd ever go through to sync something up, it'd be, all right, now don't close the browser. It's going through and syncing. Make sure you're good. And it'd be such an effort. And so the fact that they've added this differential sync is really, really cool. And then as I kind of mentioned too, AutoCAD files, which 90% of us don't care, but if you're in the construction business, if you're in the architecture planning business, and you have all these AutoCAD files of business or of building plans and stuff, I know that might have been a pain point for you in the past where you couldn't store your AutoCAD files, or you could store them but it couldn't interpret them. Well, they now have AutoCAD as a list of file types that are supported. And the one thing too is they have full fidelity previews. You could always put the files in there and download them out, but they were just a file. Now you can actually go through and see a preview of the file and some content about it in the same way you do with Word files and Excel, which is pretty cool and pretty nice to see them doing, just because, again, one of the companies that do have a need for large cloud storage is people that have these giant AutoCAD files. So nice to see that.
I think there was only one other item that I saw that I wanted to mention, and
Sure.
we have mentioned it in the past, but it's interesting to know that Microsoft Teams now is going to have music on hold. So when you have phone calls and you put people on hold, you can be serenaded by minions singing along to keep people occupied,
Yeah,
So yeah,
I think this is a wonderful example of, you are starting to see them really go through and focus on some of the smaller aspects of Microsoft Teams calling that, one, really brings it up to par with what you're doing with Skype, but two, really makes it a more approachable, viable solution for enterprise voice for enterprises. A lot of us out there, I think, probably 95% of the people that are using Office 365, they never really fully embrace the enterprise voice model. Some people might have gone out there and explored with it, but if you did, you were on a Link server or a Skype server, if they eventually renamed it, but most people still refer to it as Link. And that was pretty robust infrastructure. You had a SIP trunk in there, and that was kind of its own world. And that never really was comfortable moving to the cloud. They've made strides in it over the past, but now that they've actually announced that Skype for Business is being, decremented, as being end of life, they're really trying to put some effort into bring Teams up. So in addition to the hold music, which we got the lovely minions playing for Tom over there, they're doing some other stuff too that, again, is small things, but stuff that really make it a more viable solution. So if you have PSTN calling right now, when you go through and call, even if I'm calling someone else, so I have a number linked to my Skype, I have PSTN calling on my account for work. I do this because I work from home. I have a cell phone, but I don't really want to give my cell phone out to every single person that needs to call us. So we basically have gone and set up a 1-800 number as well as a direct office number for me that's tied to my Skype. But if I call someone else in my organization that also has that PSTN calling, right now all it puts up is a phone number. There's no identifying information that says, oh, this is blah, blah, blah from your organization calling you, because it sees it as a phone call. Well, they're now doing that. So it's going to display PSTN callers' names based on the Azure Active Directory information. So, if you're going through and you're doing some of that, no longer is it just going to be a phone number. And again, these are the small things that they're doing that makes a company more comfortable with having the conversation of, well, we could maybe actually viably do this. Let's replace the desk phones in the contract that we have with, whatever company you have, Verizon, AT&T, 3, and whatever it is, Avaya. Let's replace that and actually look at moving into the cloud and embracing that too. And I think it's a great move from Microsoft. The other thing that I saw they were doing that I thought was pretty cool is dynamic emergency calling. And it's basically the idea of, say I need to call an emergency line, whether it be 911 or whatever. They're basically doing stuff where if you go through and call, it will realize where you are, where your number's associated, stuff like that, send that information to, so that way you're calling the closest system, as well as be able to do location information with them. So again, making this a more viable solution for someone like myself. Maybe if that's the only phone number I have, well, now it's just as safe as it will be calling from a landline and knowing what's going on and sharing some of that information.
Well, that would be good, because if I ever called 911 from my headset here, if that isn't in place, they're going to send emergency people to our company
In
location
Washington
in Portland.
or Portland, yeah.
And it's like, I'm sorry, but I'm dying over here in Minneapolis.
Tom's
Help
up to the
me.
ground. Help!
I've fallen and I can't get up. Come on. So yeah, that's, I think, a critical thing to start to get the same usage that you can get in Skype. So
Yeah, and again, I think this is following a general trend of making Teams and Teams calling a more enterprise desirable feature and replacing some of those features or matching some of those features that Skype had, which is good to see. I think it was always going to be the case that when they announced the end of life of Skype, Teams wasn't going to have everything because Microsoft says they are required to give you a 2-year notice before end of life. But that doesn't mean they just stop development at that point. So nice to see now that they've announced the end of life of Skype, they're still developing and working hard on bringing some of these enterprise features.
yeah, because I know our company has started to have that discussion where we're looking at switching to Teams and getting rid of Skype on-prem at towards the end of 2020, and people are like, oh my gosh, I hate Teams calling, and what about this, and what about this, and what about this? And right now it's like, it may not have everything right now, but I can tell you with solid evidence that Microsoft understands that, and they are doing a lot of changes for Teams calling right now. So by the time we get ready to do that, a lot of that functionality is going to be on par with what you currently have in Skype.
So the last section that we have, there is no cancel today. So the last thing we're going to be talking about is launched. This is stuff that should be available for everyone. You can go through and get your hands on. Most of the stuff in the launch section for today, we have talked about in previous shows. So we're going to highlight one or two things that we think are important or people might want to know. But for the most part, if you're curious about what is actually launched, there's nothing necessarily that we think is life-changing in there. It's stuff that we've probably talked about in the rolling out stage in the past couple of shows, or the past, month or two. So, Tom, you want to go ahead and talk about one or two things in launch that you're excited to see?
Yeah, there was only one thing in here that I don't think we've touched on ever, so I'm kind of surprised to see it launched already, and that is scan OCR support for iOS. So if you have an iPhone, if you're doing scan capture in iOS for like OneDrive for Business, it's now going to do OCR, which is optical character recognition. And for those of you who aren't quite familiar with that or who don't use it very often, in effect, that means you could like take a picture of an invoice or take a picture of a menu or something like that. And it's actually going to extract the text out and make it such that those the text element of that is going to be searchable, because those words are now actually associated with that image instead of just an image that doesn't have any searchable opportunity to it because it's just a picture. So the fact that they're now supporting that OCR, I think, is really big, because that means if you're going to sit there and capture a receipt and store it in OneDrive, and then you're trying to go out and think, oh, well, I went to that sushi restaurant, but I don't remember what that receipt image was called and where is it? Well, now you could, search for sushi, and there's a really good chance that that's going to come up in the search, because if there was sushi on the receipt that you got, then sushi is going to be a searchable term for that image.
Yeah, I love OCR. As a technical person, it's not that uncommon that we'll whiteboard stuff with customers, especially when we go on site, and then take pictures of it so we know what's going on. And being able to have that in notes that we then can OCR and search for that content makes it so awesome. So I wanted to highlight two things, but I'll say in general, most of the stuff that falls into launch that we're not focusing on, they had quite a few updates coming out for Intune of stuff that we've talked about in the past, of stuff related to, Apple's volume purchasing licensing and some of the features there. And then also they had a decent amount of stuff going on about, again, Outlook features that you're seeing, again, post messaging conference. So, stuff for Android, stuff for iOS, stuff even for just desktop Outlook. So a lot of different stuff in there, features that are going through and rolling out. If you guys are curious, if you think that's going to have a great impact to you, you can definitely go through and follow up and look at what we have in the roadmap. But most of that stuff is just, small enhancements that we've probably spoken of in the past. The two things that I did want to mention, I think we've talked about both of these, but I think it's worth noting. If you are a virtual desktop user, the VDI environment, they basically have finally launched that the Windows Virtual Desktop now has some of the best features for OneDrive. So stuff like files on demand that you're really comfortable, and we've talked about before, and everyone probably is comfortable with. That doesn't work on most virtual desktop environments, but for Windows Virtual Desktop, it does. So if you are a virtual desktop environment system, especially if you're using Windows, some of these more enterprise and nice features of OneDrive are now going to be launched out and available to you that you should start to be able to see right now. And then the final thing that I wanted to mention that I thought was pretty cool, and I know we have talked about this, the per site anyone link expiration policy. I think we might even talked about this last week. The ability for you to go in and set a custom expiration policy per site rather than being tenant wide, it should now be live. So you can go in and say, okay, I want to share this link with anyone, but I want it to never expire. I want it to expire 365 days from now. That may make sense on some of your marketing campaigns and stuff like that, but you could also then go through and say, okay, well, I want this to expire in 2 weeks for some internal information that I'm sharing out for a RFP or something like that. You no longer have to have one policy for everything. You can pick and choose by site, which is pretty cool.
It is.
All right. Well, I think that for the most part wraps us up for this week. It looks like Jen was never able to get on through her phone, so you're stuck with the beautiful me and Tom. But hopefully you guys were able to bear through it. As always, we appreciate you guys joining us. We're all the way into October, so we're excited to talk about what's coming through the rest of the year. We're officially into Q4. It's probably worth noting as you go through and you look at some of the dates that are on there. These are rough estimates. One of the good examples, and I already had one of my customers that I sent in this feedback, the announcement about them coming out and having the ticket response in GCC is listed that it should be released in Q3, but that's something in development, and like Q3 ended last week.
No, it's coming out on September 42nd. It's okay.
Right,
it's
right,
still
exactly.
still in there.
So it's one of those things you can kind of expect to see that, but we're excited. We'll keep going through and talking about stuff. Keep in mind, Ignite is not too far away as we're moving closer and closer to that time. We'll probably go through the same thing we did with the messaging conference. We'll start to see some stuff kind of lag on updates, and then after Ignite, we'll probably have a special show where we go for like 12 hours and talk about the cool things about Ignite. But excited to do that. If you guys are going to Ignite, let us know. I myself will definitely be there. I even saw a tweet last night, Tom, that if you're going to Ignite, you can take any Microsoft certification for free while you're there.
I did see that
I thought that was pretty cool.
Twitter. Yeah, that is pretty cool. I'm gonna, I'm torn because I've gone to Ignite a couple times in the past, and I really like large conferences. Not going to be going this year because we've got the migration and everything. But it's like, dang, I would love to be there with everybody and meet all my friends and, be surrounded by like 30,000 of my closest friends. Bacon every morning for breakfast.
Yeah, it should be fun. I'm definitely looking forward to it. I've started doing a lot more Azure in my current job, and just being able to go through and see some exciting new things coming there. I was even doing that a little bit previously when I went, when I really wasn't doing much Azure for my job. I'm just a nerd and techie, and I thought that stuff was cool. So I'm excited about going and seeing some of the new stuff that they have coming out to launch. Some of the new things they're doing with some of the M365 technologies. Specifically, I'm really excited to see where they're going with Autopilot and Intune. I think there's a lot of advancement yet to come there. So I'm really excited to see what they're doing this year. But anyways, guys, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time as always, and I'm sure we'll talk to you guys next week.
Bye, everyone.